Well, for more analysis, we can cross now to Brussels and speak to Marc Pierini, who is the visiting scholar at Carnegie Europe and a former EU ambassador and head of delegation to Turkey. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, just under 4 months from now, Turkey is going to go to the polls. What are your first thoughts about this announcement by President Erdogan?
Well, probably another device to keep the opposition on their toes. There is a real debate in Turkey about whether it is constitutional for President Erdogan to run in this election, but not all the opposition parties are on the same line whether to protest or not. So it is going to happen on the day Erdogan has decided, and the opposition will perhaps not protest very much. What is important here is that this is one device, but the incumbent president has a massive electoral toolbox that he will use. He will use many different ways to make sure that he prevails and to make sure that the opposition parties, what they call the table of six opposition parties, is crippled. So it goes from legal issues, changing the electoral law, to prosecution, as your correspondent just mentioned, to helicopter money, all sorts of things that are now raining daily on the Turkish citizens. And this is the normal way President Erdogan or Prime Minister Erdogan before has operated.
Just looking at the state of the Turkish economy, I mean, I go there often myself. I mean, the inflation has been out of control, really high levels of inflation in the last year or so. The Turkish currency has tanked against other major currencies. I mean, given the hardship faced by Turkish people, economically speaking, how would you rate President Erdogan's chances of being re-elected?
Well, we should remember that the first 10, 12 years of Erdogan as Prime Minister were quite successful in the economic field, but recently it has been a disaster. You just mentioned the atrocious rate of inflation. Even if the statistics are doctored by the government, 80%, 60% inflation, that's momentous, and it's probably a lot higher than that. But the economy has not collapsed for several reasons. The government has used a lot of expedients. One, it has not taken sanctions against Russia, so there is a lot of trade going on with Russia, a lot of exports of Russian oil and so on. And this is a lot of money. Also, some other expedient measures have been taken. Currency swaps, for example, that is paying Russian gas in ruble and not in dollars, or advance payment by Russia on the nuclear plant being built in Akuyu in the south of Turkey. These things are sort of stopgap measures. They're not very credible in financial circles, but they help the economy to survive. The key point here is that the president has taken a raft of electoral spending decisions. It goes from increasing the minimum salary, salary for officials, various specific categories, a lending scheme for first acquisition of a house, that sort of thing. All of these are electoral promises. They're not funded. And we should remember that the net currency reserves of Turkey are negative. So it is an impending disaster, but they've remained on the brink without collapsing so far. And that, for President Erdogan, has to last as long as possible. And it is probably one of the reasons why the elections have been put forward.
Indeed. And I mean, you touch on some points there about how, diplomatically speaking, we've seen Turkey these last few years increasingly playing hardball, diplomatically speaking, whether it's standing up to the NATO accession of Finland and Sweden, or whether it's having some negotiating role with between Ukraine and Russia. I'm just wondering how advantageous that's been to President Erdogan in the view of his domestic audience?
Well, as in any country, people vote locally. They vote for the problems of their country and they vote for their bank account. So the main danger for President Erdogan is obviously the state of the economy and the credibility of these electoral spending. But there's one element that perhaps we underestimate in Western Europe, which is the notion of a strong leader in a troubled world and in a country under threat. We don't realize this because we don't necessarily follow Turkey's conspiracy theories on a daily basis, but for years now, the West has been demonized. The West, I mean, if you read pro-government newspapers, the US has a base in northern Greece, northeastern Greece, that is very close to the Turkish border, which is used, of course, for the supply of weapons to Ukraine. But in the Turkish government media, this is the prelude to an invasion of Turkey by the US, by the West, to divide the country. I mean, it makes no sense from a Western point of view, but this is the narrative that is served to the people on a daily basis. So, and it's not indifferent. That is, in Turkey, the notion of a strong leader in a troubled period, troubled time, troubled geography is important. And of course, you have a war in the north, in Ukraine. You have trouble in the southern Caucasus. You have a civil war in Syria. So there are many problems. And the president of Turkey is trying to portray himself as the only strong leader that can keep Turkey going in these difficult times.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. Marc Pierini at Carnegie Europe. Thank you very much indeed.